Welcome to Trade and Sip, the podcast where we celebrate the stories and brilliance of women in trades. I'm your host, Karina, and today we're diving into a conversation that's close to the heart and incredibly important. As it's Women's Health Week, I wanted to bring in a fellow mentor who is passionate for advocating for women's health and well-being. Today we're sitting down with Erinn, a specialist mentor for women in trades, who's helping to start vital conversations around women's health. We'll be talking about what it's really like to live with endometriosis, a condition that affects millions of women and yet are often misunderstood. So grab your drink, settle in, and let's dive into Erin's story. Hi Erin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
I'm super excited as well. We're kicking off the month with Women's Health Week. It's running from the 1st to the 5th of September. It's a week dedicated to encouraging women across all of Australia to make their health the number one priority, to check in with themselves, with their friends, with their family, and to start a conversation that's often overlooked. And today, I thought you'd be a perfect person to talk about this topic. Can you start by sharing a bit about your journey, both personally and professionally, and why women's health is such an important topic for you?
Yeah, definitely. So I have always had the most painful periods. I would have days off work, days off school, and this is starting, at the age of 12. So I didn't really understand. I thought, you get your period and that's be a part of being a woman. And I am someone who I don't have a mum in my life. So I could just go and ask, is this normal? I saw my older sister who she had very similar. He was in bed in pain, and I looked at that as something that was normal. And over time, progressively, it just kept getting worse. I started getting pain around my ovulation, which I mean, I don't know about you, but when I was 19, I didn't know anything about ovulation or the different parts of my cycle. So that's something that was a bit of a later aha moment. And then it just kept getting worse. I got to the stage where I was physically collapsing, not being able to hold myself up. I was so sick, and this was at all points of my cycle. I didn't need to be on my period to get the most extreme pain. It got to the point where I walked to work, and it was about a 10-minute walk, and that was excruciating. I would practically limp up the smallest little incline to get to work because the pain would just skyrocket, from my pelvic floor down to my knees. I was just in so much pain. Um, and I remember speaking about it to a older lady at work who had children just a bit older than me, and she had said, go and see your doctor because it could be your liver, it could be your kidneys, could be, anything in that region. But best to go get it looked at. So I, from there, spoke to my doctor who said it sounded exactly like appendicitis. And I went to emergency where they pumped me full of painkillers. I was out of it. I was vomiting. I was so sick. They ran every test they could, different ultrasounds, and they couldn't find out what was wrong with me. And then it got to the point where they had done everything they could and looked at me and said, oh, it could be a reproductive issue. So, there's long wait lists for that, up to 6 months. So we suggest that you just go home and wait. And
That's
that was,
crazy.
yeah, it was a very hard time. And that unfortunately was not the only instance that I encountered. That happened 2 or 3 more times before I went into emergency. I waited over 20 hours and was in pain. I couldn't hold it. Was absolutely debilitating. And around the 21-hour mark, a nurse pulled me in, did some more general tests and questions, and pressed very slightly on my stomach, and I screamed. Like, it was, my dad could hear me from the waiting room. It was so loud and so powerful, and that's when I was finally taken seriously. Fast forward a few days of laying in a bed, I finally saw a gynecologist who was a male, very different to what I was expecting. And he asked me a couple of questions, had a very, very brief skim of my file, and then came over and touched my tummy. And he just dropped, his face dropped, and he said, "You should have been seen months ago. What's going on?" And I, for once, had that, maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I'm not being dramatic like everyone else has told me. And he booked me for surgery the next day. And it just goes to show the power of the importance of that, having an emergency surgery, not having any formal diagnosis at that point. Um, it was very powerful that I finally got some sort of a resolution. Now that's looking back almost 5 years now, and this is still something that affects me on a day-to-day basis. I've had multiple instances of hospitalization, um, ketamine infusions, being, in and out of hospital, really poor treatment from nursing staff and doctors, and not being considered as a suitable patient because I spoke up about the pain that I was facing and the poor care that I was being given. Now I'm in a role where 2 years ago I was on my feet every day, very labor intensive, moving around, managing people, and it was so hard to be a human and be a person. And I would sit down on the floor mid-shift and just hold back my tears because the pain was just so debilitating. And now I'm in a position where I can be that change for people. I can have those conversations with, females who don't understand what's going on and encourage them to seek action. I can give them tips and advice on ways to manage this in the workplace, or to have those conversations with employers, or even be that voice to inform employers of what this is if they don't know, because chances are they've got an employee that has endometriosis, or their daughter has painful periods, or their wife has had to have a hysterectomy because the pain was just too intense. And that's why I'm here. That's my mission, and to be that voice and to stand beside people and help them be strong and be one. And the more we talk about it, the stronger our voices get, and then eventually there'll be a bit more rights for us, and people understand what we go through, and we won't be labeled as lazy or whinging or anything like that. We can finally be treated, equally.
Yeah, that's absolutely powerful. And it must have been a really intense experience for you because all of you went to emergency two, three times, and all of the times where you were dismissed by nurses and even doctors, which is, I can imagine it can be so heartbreaking. How did that experience kind of have an impact on your mental health?
Yeah, my confidence was honestly at an all-time low. I was so scared of going in and just being pumped with painkillers and sent home, or being told I was being irrational for having a mobility aid and needing that to walk around. It really it rocked me a lot, from that perspective. But, you know, being someone who's got a chronic illness, it's so hard to get out of bed each day and want to go and do things like go outside and see family and go hang out with friends. You lose a lot of that because you're scared and you've got anxiety that if you have a flare up and you're away from your home, you can't just lay down and you can't use your strategies that you previously have relied on to be able to minimize that. And, that anxiety, it ended up taking a massive toll on me, being someone, like I said, who was on my feet all day. Going to work was really hard because I didn't know when a flare up was going to happen, or I was constantly tracking my periods and watching those cycles go round and round and just being on edge that at any moment I could be in this debilitating pain and no one would care and no one would take me seriously. And I think that's one of those things with endometriosis that no one talks about. And there's not enough advocacy for the mental health side. Mental health is a huge topic, and we all love to talk about how important it is. But for people with any sort of illness, any sort of sickness, whether that's endometriosis, heart conditions, anything along those scopes, that part isn't taken seriously. And that's a huge part of what we go through, the fatigue and you know not being able to physically get yourself up. It's really hard, and it takes a lot of lifestyle changes and ways to implement routines to be able to break that cycle, because the first step is within. The first step is yourself and being that voice and speaking out, and then everything comes after that.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, you mentioned about the flare-ups that could happen, and it can be unexpected working day or whatnot. What does a flare-up look like for you? Like, what are like the symptoms?
Yeah, so flare-ups are unfortunately very different for everyone. There's no one size fits all, and everyone experiences something differently. But from a personal level, it's just this intense pain. It's this intense pain, and it can be anywhere. It can be, around your abdomen, your lower back. I personally get really bad sciatica, which, you know, basically limits my my movement in one side of my body. And then there's the bloating on top of that, looking like you're 5 months pregnant as someone with limited fertility. It's really harsh.
Mm.
And it's on top of that, the brain fog that comes with it, having very clouded thoughts and a very lack of motivation. It's really hard to stay on track because your brain just keeps going to what you're experiencing and the pain that you're in, and it just wipes your brain of everything that you're currently thinking of. So yeah, from a personal level, that's where my flare from there. It is hard to manage, but there's so many resources, so many tools, so many strategies, things that you can trial to help that. I, for one, always have a packet of anti-inflammatories, whether that's, Nurofen, anything stronger than that your doctor prescribes you, but heat packs, whether that is a wheat bag, hot water bottle, get those little hot pans, which were my saviors. And I'd have them on my stomach at all times. Tens machines, they're a great thing to help. But there's a lot of herbal things as well. You can do your own research as far as the naturopathic options that are available, and finding something that works for you, finding a routine, limiting food that may flare you up. Alcohol is another big one, is limiting your alcohol intake as much as that has an effect on your personal life, with community and friendships. They're the sort of sacrifices that you make to stay well, and whatever that looks like in each person's situation, you just build it around there.
Yeah, lots of adjusting and amending for your health and putting that, your health a priority, it does take a lot of decision making. And yeah, and you mentioned about limiting alcohol, and obviously that kind of relates back to hanging out with your community and friends. Were there any impact on your life with this diagnosis?
Um, yes and no.
Mm.
So I am very fortunate in the friendship group that I have, know my story very well. But they haven't always known my story. And there was a lot of time where I was missing out on events, or our family, our group, we're very big on going camping. So we like to go away on the weekends. We're very outdoorsy, and there were so many times I couldn't do that because that fear of being outside and being away and 2 hours in the bush, it wasn't realistic at that point. And it took a lot of adjustments. And I think I started initiating those conversations with my friends and the people close to me. I had a brilliant group of males by my bedside in hospital, and were there cheering me on and supporting me, and running down the corridor and getting me a cup of tea if I needed it. It's, I'm very fortunate in that aspect, and that has opened the doors to so many conversations. My partner is a big advocate for women's health, and he is so passionate because he's seen my experiences, and now he is the type of person that people approach to get advice for their partners. They have friends who have issues with fertility and concerns in that area, and he is their safe person to speak to. So community has been such a big focus for me in building those people who understands me, help empower me and uplift me and support me, because unfortunately it's not always a happy moment. We all go through it, but it's knowing that the people who are behind you are there to help push you up when you can.
Yeah, the people around you really does make such a difference on how you go through these things as well. Your family, your friends, your partners.
Mm.
It's well, I think it says a lot about you as a person, Erin, because you're such a loving person. Of course, all the
Thank
friends
you.
around you love you and care for you. You mentioned about routines and adjusting your day to day with, this diagnosis of endo and as well as like daily flare-ups that you have to deal with. These things are such personal experiences as well, in your mind and as well as for your heart, your mental well-being. What kind of mindset did you have to adjust to these such intense adversities?
Yeah, look, it was really hard to have that change in mindset, because you're stuck in something for a really long time, and that becomes your norm. And I guess the biggest thing is the people around me was my biggest cheerleader, and what really helped shape my mindset. I have a little sister who is 15, and she's starting to go through these concerns and issues in her life. And she's the type of person that I want to be able to speak up about these things. But when she gets to my age, I want there to be so much more knowledge. And that has really helped me a lot. But also having this exposure to different women in industries, different women in trades, and especially at a younger age demographic, there's so much misinformation, and people in the media, and just general outdated mindsets around this condition, and I want them to have that voice. And I think that was my biggest push and my biggest motivator, and I was able to build around that. So being able to have that free conversation with someone, I had to put that into practice myself. And now I'm very open to say, I've just got my period, I'm on day 3, and it's not good. I'm all over the shop, and I'm free to say that, and I'm happy to say that, because I know the more I say it and the more I practice it, the more that'll flow onto other people. And the routines off the back of that have helped strengthen my day to day. I'm very structured in my day. I'm known in my family for having a very solid routine, and everyone laughs at me, but it's my way that I keep going. And it would be so easy just to lay in bed and just think, woe is me, I can't get through it. But I know that I need to show up, and I need to be that voice, and I need to be an example. And now, I wake up, I go to the gym, I'm up at 6 o'clock, I'm in the gym, I'm, starting my day off on a positive note, because I know that if I have a flare up, it does typically hit me around that mid-afternoon period. So if I'm a write off for the rest of the day, I've already done a big chunk of my intensive work for the day, and everything else just flows from there. I am very big on looking after myself and prioritizing fueling my body with foods that are non-triggers and foods that work for my body. And that changes from person to person. And that's a lot of trial and error and a lot of failed attempts and a lot of flare-ups off the back of that. But I've been able to get myself into a very structured lifestyle where I give myself that balance of things I enjoy and things that I want to do, and things that are my non-negotiables, my going to the gym, my work, seeing family, friends, running around after my 3-year-old nephew, all of these things that are my non-negotiables. I have to do them and piece everything in by there.
And to those who've just been newly diagnosed with endo or just struggling to find answers within their own health, what kind of advice do you give?
Yeah, so my biggest piece of advice, and the thing that I am very strong in advocating about, is your voice. And when I say using your voice, I don't just mean going out and telling doctors that you want to change and that that's not right. It starts from the bottom, and you have to start believing your own voice, because if you don't believe what you're saying, no one else is going to. So start practicing those conversations, telling yourself that what you're going through isn't normal and that you deserve answers, telling yourself that you're strong and you're kind and you're amazing and you'll push through it, and have those reinforcing conversations. And once you've mastered that, then you move on from there. You talk with your friends, could be your best friend, your partner, your sister, your mum, whoever that is in your life. You move on to them as your next step. And the more confident that you get with your voice, the more your message is going to impact people, and that will only spread. And the more voices we have, the more advocating there is, and the more people that listen, is the more change we're going to see. And that's where it starts. And you may feel silly doing your affirmations in the mirror in the morning, but I promise one day they will help.
We do need that morning affirmations. They do
Yeah.
such a difference to you.
Yes.
Erin, well, thank you so much for sharing your stories with
No,
us today. We really
thank you.
appreciate it. And before we close off our podcast, I just wanted to touch on your personal program that you're doing wellness with Erin. I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I do run a Instagram wellness mentor, Erin, and that is my page where I talk about anything in that wellness area. So there will be discussions of endometriosis, PCOS, mental health is another big focus, but also on fatigue management, fatigue prevention, and self-care. It's so important that those are the things that we look at. And I'd love for as many people to come and join my journey, and we can all use our voices together. I'm also on LinkedIn, Erinn Johnston, and I share a lot of my journey and my mentor work there. So whichever platform you prefer, would love to see you there.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today, Erin. And to our listeners, if you or someone you know is navigating endometriosis or any sort of health issues, know that you're not alone and there's always help available for you to reach out. To our listeners, if Erin's story inspired you, share this episode, follow Trade and Sip, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, goodbye.